I'm at an undisclosed location.
You ever have any life and death situations?
Terrorists are still looking for me.
Right. How successful do you think foreign governments were in impacting the election?
I will not be surprised if when we unpack what happened on Capitol Hill, we discover, I have my suspicions.
You have a side hobby.
I call this the crazy man's handcuffs.
Hey family, it's Carlos Watson. What a treat I have for you today. When we started the Carlos Watson Show, I thought one of the people I want to talk to is former director of the CIA, John McLaughlin. And not only because he's always wise and interesting, but because I think we're in such a transformational moment. And I wanted to hear from John. I wanted to hear from him on what Biden will do, who Trump was, who the most interesting presidents he met, what kind of things has he seen that the rest of us will never see. You're going to love John McLaughlin. Here's a treat.
The Carlos Watson Show is brought to you by American Family Insurance.
John, nice to see you. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Carlos. Always great to see you.
Good to see you.
I'm at an undisclosed location.
I like that. John, when did you move to Virginia, the D.C. area?
Well, I grew up in Pittsburgh and went to school in Ohio, but I moved to this area about the time that I joined the CIA, roughly the mid-'70s. But I don't actually tell people where I live beyond just saying I live out in Virginia. Terrorists are still looking for me.
Right.
I say that and laugh, but I have to actually think about it.
After serving in Vietnam, John McLaughlin became the director of the CIA. He went on to serve 30 years in the CIA, working under President George W. Bush and President Bill Clinton.
We understand that a plane has crashed into the World Trade Center.
John was the acting CIA director during the 9/11 attacks at the World Trade Center. Did you ever have any life and death situations where literally you feared for your life in the moment?
More in Vietnam than during my agency career. When I was in Vietnam, we were pretty much under constant mortar and rocket attack. And in my office, I have the remnant of a shell that came quite close once. But in the agency, I would say not so much that I knew about, but when you traveled, you assumed you were under surveillance. And to some degree, you were at the mercy of whoever was surveilling you if you didn't have some kind of security. And in my earlier years, I had no real security other than my cover and my carefulness with avoiding surveillance and so forth.
To the extent you can talk about, what kind of work did you do? Were you 007? Did you get to do undercover work?
Well, undercover work, but I wouldn't portray myself as 007. I started as an analyst of communism in Southern Europe and Eastern Europe. And I went through a series of jobs that were mostly, for the first half of my career, I would say, mostly analytic jobs, rising to be the director of all analysis for the agency. Now, when you say, did I do undercover work? Well, I went overseas quite often undercover. But what I was doing was more akin to what a foreign correspondent does than to what a case officer does.
Interesting. And so if you can, what was the most surprising thing that ever happened while you were at the agency?
There are good surprises and bad surprises and neutral surprises. Though I want to leaven that a little bit by saying we weren't really surprised when the Berlin Wall came down. But it was a surprise nonetheless that basically the Cold War was really ending. I think the Cold War ended earlier in 1989 when President George H.W. Bush and Mikhail Gorbachev met in Malta, the Malta summit. And at the end of that summit, they basically gave a press conference, made statements that said, essentially, the Cold War is over. And so I don't want to say that was a surprise. The CIA was quite prescient about that, but it was nonetheless a pleasant surprise,
right,
that it actually happened.
Do you think that Russia compromised the president and compromised the 2016 election?
They definitely succeeded in driving wedges between Americans, groups that were already divided. I have not had a chance yet to go through the big 1,000-page report that was done by the Senate Intelligence Committee, apparently elaborating on the Mueller report. The Mueller report had 2 volumes, and most people focused on volume 2, particularly in the media, because it had to do with obstruction of justice. To me, the more interesting volume was volume 1, which documented in great detail what the Russians had actually done. And they came at us at 2 or 3 different vectors. They wanted to develop people here, and they did that in a number of ways. They wanted to distort information here and have it flow through social media, and they succeeded in that to a degree that we can't quite measure, but you see glimmers of it in different things. They sponsored something as weird as putting a mannequin of Hillary Clinton in a cage and parading it through the streets. That was the result of a Russian-inspired operation. That's pretty serious, I think. I think they have to look at their activities here with some satisfaction from their perspective.
Our home is the training ground for her dreams policy. Insure carefully. Dream fearlessly.
In this past election, how successful do you think foreign governments were in shaping voting habits and impacting the election?
I have not seen data that would allow me to give a credible, confident answer. I would be misleading people if I tried to suggest I knew. I have my suspicions. Well, we know they were active in social media. Lots of credible people in the Homeland Security Department and in the FBI have said that publicly. We know that. What we don't know yet is we don't have the equivalent of the Mueller report for 2020 yet. We need to have that. And we will get it eventually. I'm sure that the intelligence committees in Congress will ultimately document that. Let me label this as, at this point, sheer speculation. I will not be surprised if when we unpack what happened on Capitol Hill, we discover that in the social media stimulus for that, we will find personalities and identities that ultimately will turn out to be Russian.
We have visual evidence that some protesters have made it inside the Capitol building, around the security, and are gathering around the area where the Senate was in session.
So, John, what would you make of that if you were back at the agency again? The fact that people were able to enter the Capitol, they were able to sit at Nancy Pelosi's desk. Sounds like they might even have taken her laptop, if we understand that correctly. Like, how do you analyze that?
Well, a lot of things could be said about it. At some level, it is an intelligence failure, not of the CIA, because that's the CIA's actually forbidden from following domestic groups. But certainly those institutions in our country, ranging from Homeland Security to Customs and Border Patrol to the FBI, should have had clues from social media.
This was a fraudulent election, but we can't play into the hands of these people. We have to have peace. So go home. We love you. You're very special.
You also have the clue of the way the president behaved in essentially encouraging, saying this was going to be wild and so forth. It doesn't take a big leap of analysis to say if the president of the United States says we're going to have a wild demonstration, that's not a church meeting. So I think people dropped the ball there.
So, John, if you were back in your old job, briefing a new president, as you did with Bill Clinton almost 25 years ago, what would be the top 4 or 5 things that you'd say, Mr. President-elect, here are the 4 or 5 things I want to make sure that I put in front of you and that you're thinking about right now?
Well, of course, the pandemic has to be number one. And even as a CIA officer, you would go into it, but you would go into it more from the standpoint of what is the global impact of this? As CIA, you're not going to advise him on how to distribute a vaccine, but you're going to talk about the global impact, and you're also going to have assessed the potential for future pandemics. The CIA has been looking at this for a long time, has been writing about pandemics as a danger for more than a dozen years. Second would be climate change. I'm impressed that the latest UN study says we have less than a dozen years before we cross the threshold that we should not cross if we wish to avoid catastrophic effects of climate change. The third would be China. And I would present China not so much as an enemy, but as a serious competitor that will have a larger economy than ours. It already does in purchasing power parity terms, and soon will have such a large economy in nominal terms. But my pitch would be more toward the need to compete with China and to structure our military in a way that deters China. Not to imagine fighting China, but to imagine where is the right structure of things that will deter them from provocative actions that could lead to actual conflict. You don't want to get in actual conflict. You want to stop before that. The fourth would be Russia. We need to match them play per play in what we call hybrid warfare. With Russia, be aware that they will, not being stronger than us, will come at us with a mixture of things ranging from conventional force, special operations, covert action, artful dissembling, information warfare, all sort of packaged together in a strategy that is intended to degrade our position in the world.
One of the things we talk on the show a lot about is dreaming fearlessly, and how do people go about dreaming boldly, creatively, fearlessly. What kind of advice do you give the young people you teach now about how to dream fearlessly and maybe succeed despite the odds, or succeed even when it seems like initially the plans are going a little bit awry?
I tell them, pursue their passion. Don't think like careerists. Don't always be asking, what's the next rung on a ladder to get to a certain title on the door that you think you would like to have. Pursue your passion in whatever profession you've chosen. I tell them to write down the following question, which is the paradigm shift question. And I present it in an intelligence course, but I say it's really a question for life. And that is, what is it that if I could do it, would revolutionize what I do? Every word in there is important. What is it that if I could do it, would revolutionize what I do? In other words, don't close off as achievable the things that you instinctively think you probably couldn't do. This is the secret of intelligence breakthroughs, for example. I try to tell students, write that question down, because when you're up against a real problem, ask yourself, what is it that if I could do it, would solve this problem? And then brainstorm how you could do it.
Let me ask you, I know the answer, but I'm going to ask you anyhow. You know, it turns out that you have a side hobby. Tell us about that side hobby.
Obsession.
Tell me about it and show me a little bit of it. Give me a little show and tell.
Well, when I was 12 years old, I saw a movie about Houdini. I was so intrigued that I went and ran a book about him, got a book about him from the library, and then I started getting books about how to do magic tricks. And I just got into it. You know, some kids were taking piano lessons, and that's what I did instead. We actually have a group in Washington called Washington Magic. That's one word. And so if you go to www.washingtonmagic.com, you will see our website. So I'll just show you something here. I'll take a couple of rubber bands, all right? Now, with online magic, it's very hard because you have to stay in the frame. If I ever leave the frame, the audience will assume something strange is happening. And so I have to stay right in this little frame. Can you see me in the frame there?
I can.
Yeah. These are just government issue number 19 rubber bands. And you can see I've hooked myself together here. I call this the crazy man's handcuffs, because I am kind of handcuffed together. Can you see that?
Yep.
Yeah. But it's crazy man because they are really just what? Rubber.
Right.
Now watch very carefully. I think you'll be able to see them actually melt apart. Watch. Just like that.
Nicely done. Nicely done. Now, John, did you ever use any of your magic skills in doing your job? Did you ever literally disappear someone?
No, but I did show magic to foreign intelligence services as a kind of icebreaker. Yeah, we and the Russians had a relationship going there. Because magic is universally understood or universally accepted. It's like doing karaoke in Japan. It kind of puts everyone on the same level.
John, I want to turn the corner for a moment and try a little something that we always do here. I call it rapid fire, and I want to hit you with a few individual questions. I'd love your immediate reaction to them. Your favorite book?
Wow. Great Gatsby.
Favorite spy movie?
Breach.
Which of the presidents would have made the best undercover spy?
That's an interesting one. Well, probably Ronald Reagan, because he was an actor. To be an undercover spy, you have to assume a different identity and live your cover. You have to live the false identity that you have.
John, it has been such a pleasure to work with you and get to know you, and thank you for all you've done for OZY and with OZY.
Thank you, Carlos.
Thank you,
You're
John.
a great interviewer.
I love learning, and I always learn every time we talk.
I wish you a great weekend, a magical weekend.
You know what? That's what you and I haven't done yet. You haven't taught me any magic. So when next we're together, you have to bring me into that beautiful subculture, into that theatrical art.
That's a deal.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with John McLaughlin. He's always been one of my favorite people. While I feel blessed to have done a number of things in this life, you're reminded that some people have seen even more. Imagine the fact that this guy could have been your college professor. If he hadn't gone on to the agency, maybe that's what he would have done. Hey, I hope you are enjoying this show. If you are, think about subscribing if you haven't already. Definitely tell people that you know, and enjoy the podcast. Podcasts are always great, but in this particular case, there may be a little magic, pun intended. Hey, tune into the Carlos Watson Show. It's like no other. You're going to enjoy it every weekday on YouTube.